Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Onodera. I am from NIMS. Today, I'd like to speak about the use of data licensing in material science from the viewpoint of libraries. So this is the points I'd like to cover. First, I'd like to speak about NIMS, and then the open science seminars that we held, and then third is the data, how the data are handled within the NIMS. And then finally, I'd like to speak about how the libraries would be involved in data utilization and here in this framework. First, briefly, about NIMS. NIMS is the only dedicated research institute for materials. Last year in November, with the Riken and the Sansoken, the Riken and also the ICE, we were dedicated to the work on the basic research and the fundamental R&D, and the mission includes the promotion and the acceleration of the utilization of the result, and the sharing of the facility and equipments of NIMS, and also development and the enhancement of quality of researchers. We have 1,500 people working with us, and half of them are researchers, and I am a librarian with them. Libraries are holding seminars, and also we are holding advocacy activities. And as I just said, one such activity is seminars, and we had 3 series, the seminar, 3 installment seminar for the open science. So first step was the open science and copyrights law. Allow me to give you the quick overview of what we covered. The first session was held on the 8th of January last year, entitled Open Science and Copyrights Law. We had the representative from Cabinet Office, and also we had the Mr. Seoshi, who was a representative of the Committee of the Copyrights Law within the Bar Association. We had about 6% of people, 48 people, from outside, from within NIMS. Mr. Manago talked about the background of the policies of Japanese government, and she also talked about the future and the future perspective for that. And the lawyer talked about the kind of copyright law, especially about the data of the copyrights, the copyright protected data and the papers. And also he said that it is the laws we have at this moment is insufficient for the digitally disclosed the work, and the contract should have a supplementary work, and data is not a work because of the definition of that. So that means that data is not subject to the copyright law. So if the third party is going to use the data, and then the details should be determined by the contract. This was the first session, and then based on a very good response, we held the second seminar. The second seminar was about the sharing of data. We had the representatives from the publishing companies and researchers and the lawyer and the data journal, who is responsible for the scientific data, responsible for science and nature, and also the researchers. Well, I'd like to speak about that person later on, who is responsible for the polymer, and the researcher's name was Mr. Naojima, and Mr. Seoshi, the lawyer who kindly participated in the first session, also participated in the second session. From Nature, the data journal platform had been covered, and then Mr. Seoshi talked about again the copyright issue. Data is not considered the copyright work, and then database also cannot be considered as the work of which is subject to the copyright law. Looking back into the case law, it is very unlikely that it is handled as a copyright. So that means that the data can be used freely, but still it is important to have the contract with the data source. And then final session was held in November, and the data-driven researches are gaining momentum. So we decided to take up the issue of data mining and AI, which is the next generation the data utilization issue. Again, we had representatives from the publishing company and the lawyer. From the committee of the next generation data system of the Cabinet Office, Mr. Nokui, he talked about the kind of issues related to the AI. He talked about 3 points. One is as to how it is possible to or not possible to protect the right of the learning data for AI with the copyright. If it is possible, to what extent it is protected. And the second is the scope of protection for the learning algorithm as model, and also whether it is possible to protect this as the patent or the program copyright, and then also the whether the automatically generated the deliverables of AI constitute copyright. And then we have Mr. Anderson from Elsevier. This is about the cases of the text data mining, which is used by the publishing company. And so, as I said, we had 3 sessions. So the copyrights would be applied for the papers, but data is not the work of the copyright. However, it is not that we are able to do anything, but still, it is important to disclose or make public the data which will be covered by the contract. And then the IPR issue is now under the discussion. So again, we were able to understand all the things in a streamlined manner. And then about the data, the copyright. Well, we were able to streamline the copyright issues surrounding data. And then here, I'd like to speak about the case studies from the viewpoint of generator and the users, and also the user. So first is the case of the generator. The metadata could be added on top of the research data, and this has been considered as the way for the collaboration. So it is very important to share the metadata in order to have the sharing of the research itself. And one such example is shown here, which is the metadata, the recording system for the instrumentation. Within the research session, within the research committee within MEMS, we have a system which is meant for the recording. I'm sorry, I'm not able to share with you the screen, but this has been realized with the viewpoint of the researchers. So I'd like to share with you what it means. For example, instrumentation data or the measurement data. So one of the things it has to be. One of the things that we have to bear in mind in recording the metadata is that is shown here. If you only have the handwritten lab note, then we have to work on the digitization. So we have to make sure that the database, the digitalization should take place at the time of the data collection. So this system already enables the lab note, the digitization. And also, in some cases, they have to handle the machine. So, in some cases, they are not able to write. But in the case of this equipment, it has a speech recognition, so it's been handled. And about sometimes there is this discrepancies between the procedures of the experiment and the input items. So, this system enables the researchers to choose the one at the right timing. If there is the difference of the equipment, then the language can be different. But here, there is a template prepared to absorb the differences of the language of vocabulary. And in order to have good link between metadata and experimental data, the experimental data can be stored within the recording system of metadata. This is a metadata flow. This is not only for the MEMS, but also we have been discussing this issue with the rest of the community, including the scientific societies, to deal with the potential problems. So this is the academic world, the approach. So the entire community is involved. And then as the user, we have MatNavi within NEMS. So this is meant for the database. This is disclosed. And the MatNavi is for the development of the polymer. And this is it can be used free of charges. So today I'd like to speak about one service, which is the polymer database, which is included in MatNavi, how the data is collected. So this is PolyInfo, and PolyInfo is providing the information needed for the designing of the polymer, and the data source would be the published data, published articles. We only collect data alone out of this. So the reason why the data source is only limited to the articles is that we are able to identify the article, and also it is possible to collect data in a large volume, and it is already disclosed, and also it is possible to collect data which is necessary for that. And this is a process flow. First is to select the literature which is meant for this collection, and then we have about 3,000 articles a year, and with the screening we are able to reduce it down to 100 to 170. And then moving on to the collection, first is the physical data, and then based on the physical data, in order to enable the structural the search, the dictionary data is created, and then adding other things as well, and then this is disclosed in the internet for the polymer data. And for the physical data collection and the dictionary data creation, we have the involvement of the people who have already resigned, who have been working in the field of the organic science and the polymer science. And also data scientists have been taken. These are considered to be the data scientists, and this person was for the material curation. So for the material curation, it is important to collect large amount of data, and then sometimes data the outside of the scope is needed. So in some cases, we collect the numerical data out of the graphs of the scanned article. This has been developed internally, and there was the free software, but it was not very good for that. So that's the reason why the software was developed. And then there has been some inquiries from the companies, and then he acquired the patent, and then this was made possible. And then about the point kind of things we have to bear in mind in the copyright. The researcher himself, they had a consultation with the lawyer, and it was all right to distribute the software, but if the data is taken out of the graphs, then this could be an infringement of the copyright law. So this is a case 3. This is the data collection from the datasheet or the graphs. And this is case 4. This is for the provider. Earlier, as I said, we have a MatNavi, and this is a datasheet called CRIB datasheet. In what way it is provided is shown here. But before that, I'd like to explain to you what CRIB really is. I'd like to be brief in explaining the nature of CRIB. CRIB is to continue providing the load to the materials, and this would have the distortion, and in some cases it is as long as 40 years. So this was the longest period in which this kind of the load has been provided. And then about the script data, this can be distributed in a paid distribution or unpaid distribution, based on the dedicated contract. In the case of unpaid distribution, this is Matnavi. This is that something I have already explained. And in the case of so at the time of the distribution, we give them to the dedicated the organization. So we have to make sure that this is not used for the profit-seeking activities. So in the past, it was denied because of the profit-seeking activities. In the case of web, we have to have the user administration, and then about the using the web, it is only for the viewing. So it makes sure that there is no storage or the use. So in the case of unpaid distribution, digital data is not provided at all.
As for the paid distribution, data basically are the same with free distribution, but Grant Design Company of UK is providing the data set, and they are being provided as a package. And the users that ask for more detailed information, the individual contracts would be signed. This will be a direct contract with NIMS. Based on the different modes of distribution, the scope would be different. In the case of free distribution, data plotting or publishing the results of a data analysis are permitted, but use of data for commercial purpose is not permitted. As was mentioned earlier, to control the secondary use, the users need to register. In the case of paid distribution, the scope would be based on the contract with the grant design company. And when individual contracts are signed for detailed data, the scope would vary, but the data itself should not be disclosed and should not be provided to the third party. And the results of the analysis based on the use of the data are permitted. These are common cases. In case 4, the scope of the distribution or the disclosure are different based on the contract. So another case, as the data provider, within NIMS, we have what's called the MI²I. This is an initiative for the materials development based on information integration. So this is an integration of data and the materials so as to accelerate new types of research activities. And the core of the activities is the consortium activities. And this is the concept of the activities. Database tools will be used by the members so that the core technologies and skills of the members will be expanded. And the tools provided by the consortium and the network would promote the technology development. And with the technology developing, there's raindrops, and just like raindrops, they will go into individual research activities, which should promote those individual activities. That's the overall concept. Within the research community developments, we are trying to promote the sharing of data amongst the members as much as possible, and the platform is provided by NIMS. So case 5 shows the sharing amongst the members, which could be considered as a contract-based sharing. In any case, in any of these cases, there has to be a clear demarcation between what is copyright protected and what is not copyright protected. For the latter, contracts are being used to protect the integrity of the data. So far, I have talked about the relationship between the researchers, individuals, and the data, and university is not involved. And for librarians, there is no time to be directly involved, and therefore what can the librarians do within the current skill set? And I think there are three things. First is archiving and the management skills to be leveraged so that information can be shared with the researchers for acceleration of activities. And I understand that Mr. Ojiro is going to talk about that in more detail. And second is to leverage on the expertise as institutional repository to provide the platform to the researchers for archiving. And in addition to self-archiving repository, we have what's called Imeji within NIMS. Metadata items can be defined by researchers themselves, so it is expandable. The metadata developed by researchers can be collaborated with this. And the third skill set is the journal subscription. How much can you collect data would be critical. And so for text data mining, we need to have the separate journal access license and the collection of files. And I'd like to share with you the latest case that took place within NIMS. It's the library that has a connection with the publishers. So we concluded the licensing contracts for text data mining purpose. And the scope was different from publisher to publisher. Some just allowed for those journals on which we do have subscription, while others allowed larger scope if the purpose was only for research activities. Since we're talking about mining data, it doesn't have to be beautifully formatted. The text the full text and photos were the only ones that we needed. But depending on publishers, it varied. Sometimes through API, sometimes directly from the publishers and others. And the obtained data are entered into a semantic search engine. In order to enrich the data, we combine them with the information that we already had within NIMS, and we entered those in the semantic search engine as well, based on which the materials-related dictionary could be developed semi-automatically. And for machine learning and also for materials exploration. Those are the future plans. What we have learned through experience is the difficulty of defining the scope of utilization when we are to sign the license contracts. Whether the obtained information will be provided within the institution or whether it's going to be provided to the third party would mean difference in how much we pay. And whether we are going to provide the created dictionary to the publisher or not, again, would mean different prices. And if we are to provide the data to the publisher, that would mean it would be the permission of tertiary and other usage, and some of the publishers don't allow that. And therefore, in the latest case, we assume that this will be used only within NIPS. And for other cases that the negotiations will be held on a case-by-case basis. So the usage is within NIMS, so this is only up to the secondary use. But if the results are to be published for tertiary or quarterly use, then the ownership relationship is going to become really complicated, and we assume that it will be very difficult to have case-by-case negotiations. So what I can say in summary is that in the materials science area, data that can be published and data that cannot be published exist. So how do you draw the line would be critical. And I think this would provide the answer to clarifying the scope of use. And we'd like to learn more, so if you could invite us to more seminars, we would appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Onodera. Any questions?
挙手を願いたいと思いますが、
Please raise your hand if you have any questions.
この方ですか。
Is my microphone on? Nope. My name is Kakta from Jamstack. In relation to the Copyrights Act, obviously you've done your homework. It was very clear. Thank you. Now, regardless of how much you really look into the Copyrights Act, I think it's different from what you do with data. At least that's what the lawyers that I have talked to say, because the Copyrights Act, whether the content is fact or simulation, there is no difference. And whether it's interesting or not, or whether they're out there, that doesn't matter as well. So what does Copyrights Act protect is whether what matters is the expression, whether that the method of expression or the expressiveness is interesting or not. So, in essence, data would not have an innovative or interesting expression. If there is a difference in the excitedness of the expressing data, I think it could be copyright protected. Now, if all the papers are authored by AI, based on some template, and if they're going to look all the same, so no matter how innovative, how novel the content is, it would not be protected by the copyright law, which means that you have to pursue the avenue of licensing. Thank you. True. Data is outside of the scope of copyright protection. That's what the lawyer said. Data are objective fact, so there is no room for novelty. That's what I learned.
もうすでにすいません質問
Thank you very much. Yes, I totally agree with you. There is one more thing I'd like to add. In the case of data, well, there is a simulation data. So that means that we write a book or we draw a picture. It is not necessarily a representation of a fact, or they could be based on the simulation. So without having the background of the fact, we create something. So that's another thing we have to consider. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Onodera, for your presentation.